She spent longer getting ready than she had in months. I watched from the hallway as Lena examined herself in the mirror, adjusting the angle of her earrings, smoothing down the fabric of her dress, one of those vintage navy blue numbers that hinted at nostalgia while clinging to the present in all the right ways. Her copy of The Paper Garden was tucked under her arm, the spine cracked, pages frayed, stained with coffee and affection. I had seen her reread that book every year like it was a ritual, like it knew more about her than I did. "Grant, I won't be late," she called from the bedroom, not even looking back. "You don't need to wait up. You know how these readings go. Wine, talk, lines for signatures." She was already halfway out the door before I could answer, her voice trailing behind her like perfume. I followed her out to the driveway, stopping short as she slid into the driver's seat of our old Honda, tossing the book in the passenger side like it was a companion. "Have fun," I said, meaning it, mostly. "Say hi to him for me." She smiled, thin, distracted. "You wouldn't know what to say to Caleb St. James." I froze. That wasn't the author's name. But she didn't seem to notice what she'd just said, or didn't care. She backed out of the driveway, tires crunching gravel, and disappeared into the deepening dusk. For a while I convinced myself I was just being oversensitive. She'd been talking about this event all week, her favorite author. An exclusive reading at a small bookstore near the historic district, limited tickets, no cell phones allowed inside. Lena loved literary things. That's what I always told people anyway. Book clubs, podcasts, annotated poetry. She lived in stories, in possibilities, in metaphors that spilled into real life like watercolors bleeding through the page. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled onto the couch. I even opened one of her favorite books, trying to remind myself of what she loved so much about them. But the words blurred. I checked the time. An hour passed, then another. Still no word from her. Out of curiosity, maybe out of unease, I opened our shared calendar. She had added the event herself last week, even marked it Do Not Disturb. I tapped the link she'd saved, the ticket confirmation. It opened as a blank form. Not a barcode, not a seat number, not even her name. My stomach knotted. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, a forgotten email. Maybe the bookstore didn't issue digital tickets. I stared at my phone. Still nothing. It wasn't until I opened Find My Phone, a feature we both agreed to leave active after that time she lost her phone in Chicago, that I let the doubt start to bleed into something colder. Her location flickered for a second, then settled. Not at the event venue, not even close. She was at a bookstore café on the other side of town, one with soft lighting, mismatched armchairs, and a wine list. And Caleb St. James wasn't an author. He was real, and I was starting to realize I was just another character, one she was preparing to write out of the story. I stared at the location on my screen for a long time, unsure of what to do with what I was seeing. It pulsed. A small dot marked Lena's iPhone, sitting still inside a quaint little bookstore cafe called The Nesting Place. A familiar spot. We'd been there once for a winter poetry reading. She said the space reminded her of something out of a European novel. Exposed brick, vintage lampshades, pressed flowers between glass tabletops. I remembered the way her eyes lit up that night. But tonight there was no mention of the nesting place. No poetry reading. No favorite author doing a signing. Only silence. I told myself she might have stopped there before the event. Maybe she was meeting someone from her book club. Maybe the venue changed last minute. Maybe. But each new maybe was thinner than the last. I opened Instagram, then Facebook, even Threads. Lena was the kind of person who always posted from events like these, curated snaps of wine glasses balanced on paperbacks, grainy photos of authors mid-sentence, or quotes jotted in cursive on the back of her hand. Tonight, there was nothing. No live updates, no boomerang of the crowd applauding, no sepia-toned caption that said, "Dreams do come true." I tried calling once, no answer. Then again, straight to voicemail. It wasn't like her. Lena wasn't someone who ignored messages, especially not from me. We weren't the kind of couple who played those games. At least, I didn't think we were. I opened our email account and searched for anything related to the event. Tickets, newsletter reminders, author mentions. Nothing recent. Nothing dated. The ticket confirmation I'd found earlier wasn't just blank, it was never sent. a draft saved to a folder we rarely used. I stared at the last edited date. It was 3 days ago. She had never bought a ticket. Whatever she had planned tonight, it wasn't what she'd told me. The facts started to stitch themselves into something I couldn't ignore. Carefully chosen dress, her favorite book in hand, the slip of a name, Caleb, a location she didn't mention, no contact, no proof of the event, and now, radio silence. It was like a switch flipped in my mind, the kind you don't want to find but can't look away from once it's been pressed. I began retracing the past week, the subtle things, the way she'd been quieter at dinner, more absorbed in her phone, which used to rest face up beside her wine glass, now flipped down like a secret. Her morning runs were longer, and she came home with the kind of flushed cheeks that didn't come from cardio alone. I remembered one night last week when she mentioned rereading her favorite novel for comfort. She clutched it to her chest like a talisman, but now I wondered, was it comfort or cover? I thought about Caleb. I didn't know a Caleb. Not among her author crushes, not among her co-workers, not among her list of cousins I could never keep straight. It wasn't a name she'd said before, not in passing, not with familiarity, and yet it had slipped from her lips effortlessly, like it belonged there. That terrified me the most, that she didn't even flinch when she said it. Still, I wanted to be wrong, I needed to be wrong, so I searched the author's schedule for local readings that night. Independent bookstores, college panels, hotel events, nothing matched. None of her favorites were even in the state, let alone in town. There was no reading, no signing, no excuse. And yet, I didn't feel angry, at least not yet. What I felt was a slow, suffocating unraveling, like someone had pulled the thread on a sweater I didn't know was coming apart, and now I was watching the whole thing dissolve, stitch by stitch. I had given Lena space. I'd encouraged her interests, even when they left me behind. But maybe that's exactly where she wanted me to be. I set the phone down and stared into the darkened hallway of our house. The silence was different now. Not peaceful, but hollow. Like something had already left the building and just hadn't told me yet. I knew I couldn't sit still any longer. Not with the gnawing weight in my chest and the sense that reality was shifting beneath me. I grabbed my keys and my jacket and left the house without locking the door. I didn't know what I'd find at the nesting place, but I was beginning to understand what I wouldn't. Lena had gone out tonight holding a novel she claimed changed her life. But I was starting to think the fiction wasn't in the book. It was in the story she told me. And maybe I'd been cast in the wrong role all along. The parking lot behind the nesting place was half empty when I arrived. The clock on my dashboard read 8:43 p.m. The bookstore's windows glowed warm amber against the night, casting a soft halo around the front entrance. It looked exactly like I remembered. Cozy, romantic even. There was a small chalkboard sign outside advertising tonight's Quiet Hours Wine and Words, a recurring evening event that paired local poetry with soft jazz and candlelight. I remembered Lena mentioning it once, long ago. She said it was the kind of place people went when they wanted to disappear without vanishing. I stepped out of the car and stood still for a moment, listening. The hum of a distant train, the creak of a wind chime hanging above the entrance. I could almost hear the soft scrape of pages turning inside. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe to see her walking out, flushed with excitement, waving a signed book. Maybe to find myself wrong. But some part of me already knew better. I felt it in my chest, in the hollowness behind every breath. The front bell chimed gently as I opened the door. A wave of warm air, scented with old paper, cedarwood, and cinnamon tea, enveloped me. The lights inside were low. Shelves wrapped the room like ribs protecting a fragile heart. Voices murmured quietly beneath the music, a slow, melancholy saxophone filling the space. It was intimate, intentional. I scanned the room quickly, eyes catching on each seated couple, each group clustered near the fireplace. And then I saw her. She was tucked into the farthest booth near the back corner, mostly hidden from view by a leafy fig tree and the curve of a tall bookshelf. Her wineglass was half silver, fingers resting on its stem with unconscious elegance. She was laughing, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. Open, bright, completely unguarded, her head tilted toward the man sitting across from her, her whole body angled into him like gravity had changed direction. He was tall, with dark, slightly unkempt hair and that effortless, lived-in kind of charm that writers always seem to cultivate. He held a folded paperback in one hand, gesturing with the other, his voice low and rhythmic, like he was reading her something personal. Maybe he was. Her copy of The Paper Garden, the one she took with her, lay forgotten on the table between them, its spine facing away, like it no longer mattered. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. From where I stood, I could see everything I needed to see. The way her eyes followed his mouth, the way her hand drifted over the table, not quite touching his, but not far, the way their knees nearly brushed beneath the table, never pulled back. It was a private moment, one I wasn't meant to witness, but it was also mine, my wife, my book, my life, laid bare in a scene she hadn't written me into. I stayed there, frozen in place behind a stack of staff recommendations, pretending to browse titles I couldn't read. My heart wasn't racing. That would have been easier. Instead, there was a slow, quiet compression in my chest, like being slowly buried under something soft but relentless. I thought of all the nights she stayed up reading, telling me she needed quiet, of the weekends she said she was going to write alone at the lake house. I had always trusted her need for solitude, I had always honored it, but maybe I'd mistaken distance for depth. I looked again. She was leaning in now, chin resting lightly on her palm as Caleb spoke. Her smile was wistful, almost dreamy. I wondered what he was saying. A line from Neruda? A quote from Rilke? Or maybe it wasn't a quote at all. Maybe it was a promise. A new story she was letting herself believe in. Part of me wanted to walk straight over and confront them, demand an explanation, watch her eyes widen with guilt or denial. But I didn't. I knew deep down that no answer would change what I was seeing. This wasn't confusion, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was choice, plain and simple. It had already happened, whatever it was. Emotionally, if not physically, and Lena wasn't hesitating. I turned and left. The bell above the door didn't chime when I walked out, as if the bookstore itself had decided not to mark my exit. I stepped into the cold night air and stood by my car for a long moment before unlocking it. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I sat behind the wheel and stared at the steering wheel like it might have something to say. Back home, the house was dark and still. I didn't turn on the lights. I went to my desk, pulled a notepad from the drawer, and wrote 7 words that felt like both a full stop and a release. I hope your story ends how you imagined then, underneath, almost as an afterthought. I've stopped reading. I placed it on her nightstand, the one with the small brass lamp and the stack of half-read novels. Then I went to the guest room and shut the door. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room with the light off, staring at the ceiling fan slowly turning above me, counting each rotation like it might help me make sense of something that had already slipped beyond logic. I could still see her in that corner booth. I could still hear the way she laughed. Not the polite, closed-lip laugh she'd been giving me lately, but something unfiltered, full of color. I wondered when I had last heard her sound like that around me. The realization that I couldn't remember was a wound I didn't know how to tend. I didn't confront her at the café. That moment had belonged to them, their private stage, their glass of wine, their shared illusion. I didn't want to be the man who caused a scene or raised his voice in a place filled with books and quiet music. I had always prided myself on being composed, rational. But that night my restraint didn't come from dignity. It came from devastation. She came home just before midnight. I heard the familiar sound of her keys jingling as she unlocked the door, the soft creak of her boots as she stepped onto the hardwood floor. She moved lightly, carefully, the way you walk when you're trying not to wake someone. I stayed still, listening. She paused in the hallway, probably looking into our bedroom, probably noticing the note I'd left for her. She didn't knock on the guest room door. She didn't say my name. Instead, the floor creaked again, this time heading back toward the living room. A minute later, the refrigerator door opened. I imagined her pulling out a bottle of water, sipping from it like it could wash away everything she hadn't told me. I didn't expect her to come back to bed that night, and she didn't. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did. Muscle memory carried me through the motions. Fill the kettle, grind the beans, warm the mugs. I wasn't sure why I did it. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because the world hadn't stopped spinning just because my marriage had cracked open. She walked in just as I set the mugs on the counter. Her face was washed, her hair tied back, but her eyes gave her away. They were swollen at the corners, like she hadn't slept either. She glanced at the mug I'd made for her, the yellow one with the chipped rim and the faded words, "Begin again," across the side, and looked away. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded but didn't speak. There was nothing casual left to say. The room felt too small for what hung between us. She wrapped her hands around the mug and stood across from me at the kitchen island. The silence between us wasn't tense. It was thick, like the house itself had inhaled and didn't know how to exhale yet. "I saw your note," she said after a long pause. I didn't know how to respond. I kept my gaze on her face, reading every movement. "I wasn't asking for a response," I said. It wasn't a question. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by how calm I sounded, but calm is not the same as okay. "You followed me," she said. Not accusingly, but like a fact she was still processing. "I checked your location," I corrected, "after I saw the empty ticket. After you stopped answering my messages." She set the mug down slowly. "I never meant for you to find out like that." "Did you mean for me to find out at all?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. She looked down. No, that one word undid something inside me, not because it confirmed everything, but because it showed just how far she'd gone without looking back. "I didn't plan it, Grant," she said, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "It just happened. Caleb isn't... He's not what you think." "I think he's a man you meet in secret," I replied, my words deliberate. "In cafes where I'm not supposed to find you. I think he's someone who knows the parts of you I haven't been allowed near in a long time." She flinched, like my words physically struck her. "It wasn't supposed to be more than a conversation." "But it became more," I said. She nodded. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing seeing them. Or maybe I felt too much and my body just shut down the signal. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "I feel like I've been living in chapters that don't belong to me." "No," I said, stepping away from the counter. "You just don't want to read the ones you wrote with me anymore." "Grant, I saw you, Lena," I said, turning to face her fully now. "Not just last night. I've seen you slowly walk out of our story, one step at a time. You just didn't realize I'd finally stopped turning the page." She reached for me, maybe to explain, maybe just a touch. I stepped back, not out of cruelty, but clarity. "I'm not going to beg for a role in a story you're already rewriting," I said. And with that I left the room, leaving my coffee untouched on the counter, growing cold, like everything else between us. She didn't say anything else as I walked away. The sound of my footsteps down the hall seemed to echo louder than they should have, as if the house itself were stunned into stillness. I closed the door behind me, not slamming it, just quietly shutting her out. For the first time, I realized how complete silence can feel louder than any argument. She left a few hours later. I heard her moving through the bedroom, the soft rustle of fabric, the muted zip of a suitcase, the hesitant pause before the front door clicked shut. I didn't go out to see her off. I couldn't. Whatever goodbye she might have offered would have been too little and far too late. When I returned to the kitchen, the mug with "Begin Again" was still sitting where she left it, a pale ring of coffee at the bottom, the handle turned slightly in my direction like a question I refused to answer. I didn't touch it. I didn't clean it. I just stood there for a moment, staring at it, then walked away. The days that followed were quiet in a way that was both peaceful and painful. I didn't hear from her, not through a call, not a message, not even a note tucked into a drawer. At first I expected something, an apology, an explanation, a plea, but nothing came. And in that silence I found the answer I hadn't realized I was waiting for. She was already gone, even if her clothes hadn't been. I boxed up the things she left behind. Her hairbrush still in the bathroom drawer, a sweater draped over the back of her reading chair, a paperback novel with a bookmark halfway through as if she'd meant to return to it. I left that one out. Not as a tribute, more as a reminder. Some stories remain unfinished, not because they end too soon, but because the person writing them simply walks away. Caleb never reached out. I wouldn't have picked up if he had. I imagined he was probably waiting, letting her come to him like a character drawn by his gravity. Maybe they were already sipping wine in some other dim café, talking about plot and passion and possibilities. Maybe she thought she had finally stepped into the kind of story she always dreamed of. Or maybe she'd realized too late that fiction feels safer than real life, only until you try living in it. She tried to call me 2 weeks later. I let it ring. No voicemail, just a missed call that I didn't miss at all. She texted once, "Can we talk?" I stared at the words for a long time before deleting the thread without replying. Not because I was angry, but because I was done being the one who waited for closure from someone who didn't know how to give it. One morning I found myself walking past the nesting place again. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I looked through the window for a moment. Someone else was sitting in that corner booth now, reading alone, coffee in hand. Life had moved on. So had the story. I drove home and opened a blank journal, one Lena had given me years ago and inscribed with the words, "For the moments you want to remember." The irony wasn't lost on me, but instead of writing about her, I wrote about myself. Not the version of me she left behind, but the one who finally understood that being erased from someone else's narrative doesn't mean you vanish. It means it's time to write your own.